clicked on this video because you find ancient Greek mythology fascinating. No matter how many times you hear about the adventures of Odysseus and Theseus, or about the reunification of Persephone with her mother Demeter, you learn something new, not only about the myth itself, but also about life, about yourself. Ancient Greek mythology is perhaps one of the most well-studied in the world, and it has shaped the West, the Western school of thought, as no other. On this YouTube channel, we have seen many ancient Greek myths and we have even analyzed them. However, it is important to see some recurring themes and understand what ancient Greeks believed, what were their values, because these beliefs and these values influenced who we are today. And I'm not talking about Greeks, I'm talking about the world. So what can we learn from ancient Greek myths? And why are they still relevant? It is important to understand that there are different ways to interpret ancient Greek myths. There are so many different layers to be analyzed, and we could talk only about one myth for hours on end. There are also different sources for them, and let's not forget that in different contexts, the same characters have completely different personalities and a completely different role in the story. A great example would be ancient Greek tragedies. Ancient Greek tragedians would take characters from the myths and use them in different ways. Medea, for example, was a loving, loyal wife to Jason in the Argonautica. However, in the theatrical play, where she's the main heroine, I'm talking about Medea, she turns into a murderer and commits some heinous crimes against her own children. Despite all the different sources and all the different ways to analyze these myths, there are some recurring themes that we see. Now, even if you're new to ancient Greek mythology, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, the concepts of Hybris and Nemesis. Hybris, Nemesis in Greek. Hybris is an act that enrages the gods that results to Nemesis, which is the divine punishment. Now, this is not something unheard of. In most mythologies around the world, in religions, we see divine punishment. A character commits an act that enrages the deities, and he or she receives a punishment for this. Sometimes they pay this with their own lives. However, it's still interesting to see what ancient Greeks believed was the most sinful act, what would enrage the gods the most. And in most cases, if you see every single ancient Greek myth, Hybris came when someone had an overinflated ego, usually after succeeding in an aspect of life, and they thought they became gods and goddesses themselves. For example, Odysseus, Ulysses. The reason it takes so long to get home to Ithaca, to his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, is the fact that he had enraged the god of the seas, Poseidon. Odysseus had blinded one of Poseidon's sons, Cyclops Polyphemus. However, we can all agree that that was an act of self-defense. Odysseus and his men were trapped in the island of the Cyclops. They were locked in a cage and they would be eaten alive if they didn't find a way to escape. And the plan Odysseus thought was actually pretty good. He was a genius with that. It wasn't this escape plan and him blinding Polyphemus that caused the hybris. It was something else. When they were able to escape and they were aboard their vessels, Odysseus found it really funny that he was able to trick a gigantic monster into freeing him and his men. After finally escaping the cave of Polyphemus, Odysseus and his men went aboard their vessels. And that's when Odysseus started making fun of Polyphemus, because, let's be honest, he was not the brightest of the Cyclops. He was yelling and being very proud for doing what he did. I mean, he had really tricked the gigantic monster into freeing him, and he was even able to blind the Cyclops who only had one eye. As he was yelling in the open seas, Poseidon heard him, and he was really enraged. Thankfully, Odysseus had many goddesses on his side, including goddess Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy. Thankfully, Odysseus had many goddesses on his side, including Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, who appreciated the fact that Odysseus was not just using his physical power to defeat his enemies, but was using his mind to come up with some escape plans. And yes, Odysseus was the one who had come up with the idea of the Trojan horse that helped the Greeks win the war against Troy. We can see Hybris in so many different myths. Arachne, the woman who was turned into the first spider, was punished by Athena this time for believing and claiming that she was better at weaving than goddess Athena. And let's not forget the myth of Daedalus and Icarus. Daedalus was a very smart inventor and even architect. He was the one who had designed the labyrinth of the Minoans in Crete, where people believed that the mighty Minotaur lived, a creature that was half man, half bull. Well, the Minoans had captured Daedalus and his son Icarus into the labyrinth, and the man and his young son were trying to figure out some ways to escape. By using some candles that would light up the way at night, they were able to create some wings out of wax and fly out of Crete. Daedalus had advised his son Icarus, who was young and naive, do not fly too close to the sun. Otherwise, his wings would melt and he would fall into the sea. As soon as they started flying, however, this feeling of success and freedom and finally achieving what you've been waiting for so many years overtook Icarus, who saw the sun and wanted to approach it. And as a result, his wings melted and he fell from a great height into the sea, and this part of the Aegean is now called Icarian Sea up to this day. On one hand, we can understand that a great lesson here is to always listen to your parents who have more experience, and sometimes the rules parents say may not make sense to someone who is young. However, as we can see in the end, they know better. And in some cases, if the teenager, the young adult, doesn't follow these rules, the results can be deadly. However, at the same time, you can understand that sometimes getting too high too fast can lead to a free fall. And we have seen this happening to many celebrities, many people who gained fame really quickly, or power, and they thought they can reach the stars, the sun in this case, and they ended up in some really dark places, and their lives started falling apart until their premature death. Now, another recurring theme that we see in ancient Greek myths that is actually closely related to Hybris is power, and actually the thirst for power. Power plays, power dynamics. It all starts with Uranus and Gaia, the earth and the sky. Uranus, who was the sole ruler at the time, locked his children away because he didn't want to overthrow him. He didn't want to leave any space to the youth to take some of his power. He was a tyrant in a way. But Cronus, a titan and his son, was able to overthrow him and take over. But soon we see that he turned into a tyrant himself, and he was unwilling to give any power to anyone, even his own children. He was really power hungry, to the point of starting eating his own children. An act that has, of course, a symbolic meaning and has been analyzed several times in psychology. But then one of his children, who was able to survive, comes back to destroy his father and bring his siblings back to life by taking them out of his father's stomach. Although we can see some questionable acts and decisions also by Zeus, we can say that the never-ending cycle of tyranny ends with the Olympians, who in a way separate the different realms, the underworld, the world of the living, the seas, among the different siblings. We can see here that ancient Greeks were very sensitive regarding absolute power. They despised it. They were the ones who came up with a word for tyranny. And let's not forget that ancient Athens was the birthplace of democracy. And a great example of how much they valued dialogue is from the myth surrounding the naming of the city of Athens. As we have seen in other videos on this YouTube channel, Athens used to be called Kekropia. However, at some point, Greek gods and goddesses were interested in influencing the city, becoming a patron or patroness, particularly Athena and Poseidon. The two gods had a contest against each other, where instead of having a physical fight over who's gonna take over the city, with the citizens having no word over who's gonna rule over them, they just made some promises about the future of the city and what they can offer to them. Athena spawned the first olive tree, which resulted in the production of the liquid called the olive oil that was really profitable to the Athenians, while Poseidon created some lakes with salt water that were not so helpful in this case. As a result, the Athenians chose altogether Athena, who became the patroness of the city, and Athena, the city, was named after her. We can say that this was a very democratic decision, and the gods didn't have to fight against each other to take over. Some other myths revolve around the close relationship between life and death, and the purpose of life, of course. One of the most fascinating myths, for example, is the one of Persephone. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture. She herself was the goddess of vegetation, so everything that grows over the surface of the earth. She was youthful and innocent, the personification of life. But she was abducted by Hades, or Plutonus, the ruler of the underworld, the kingdom of the dead. And she had to spend 6 months over the surface of the earth and 6 months in the underworld as the queen of the dead. So in this case, she also ruled over everyone who was buried in the soil. This is such an important myth because it can be analyzed in so many different ways. Not only do we see the cycle of the seasons that is never ending, with Persephone coming in the spring and living in autumn when nature is basically dying, but we also see how closely related life and death is. Just to understand how important this myth is, it was really the focus of the Eleusinian mysteries that reportedly helped people relieve their fear of death. Also reportedly, some people believe or assume that it also revealed a way of reincarnation. Metempsychosis is the term in Greek. What happens after we die? Are we reborn, just like some flowers bloom every spring? This is an important theme that we see in so many different myths as well. But regardless of what happens after we die, you have to remember that ancient Greeks also believed in hysterophymia, the fame or perhaps the reputation you have after your death. Let's not forget about the myth with the two athletes in ancient Greece who were siblings and they ended up dying in their sleep after their mother asked Hera to bless them. For Hera, them dying young at their prime was the ultimate blessing because they would be remembered forever as heroes. Death was not the worst thing that can happen. It's the way you will be remembered after you die. Are you going to die a coward, or are you going to die as a hero and be remembered as such? And lastly, that takes us to another very important theme, which is the relation between virtue and vice. We see this, for example, with the myth of Hercules, who is at the crossroad and has to decide what type of life he wants to live. A life full of pleasures, with nothing significant happening, or a life full of hardships where he will be rewarded at the end. The life that every hero and heroine at the very end follows. From these myths we understand that virtue, being good, being a good citizen at the end, is not necessarily something you are born with. It is a choice, and you can be virtuous by doing good actions. So hopefully this started an interesting conversation about ancient Greek mythology, the themes that we notice in the different ancient Greek myths and their importance. Now, what I've been noticing is that there have been many rewritings and retellings of the stories, but from different modern perspectives. And since the Western way of thinking is changing, with certain values such as freedom of speech, objectivity versus subjectivity, and open dialogue versus authoritarianism, it is really important to remember these myths. Now I'm really curious to hear about your opinion. Do you think that ancient Greek mythology is still relevant? Can we still learn from these myths? You can start a dialogue in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe to see more content like this in the future. You can also explore this YouTube channel because I'm sure you will find a lot of videos you will like. You can visit helinika.com and find some helpful articles. And in the description you will find also your Udemy discount to learn Greek with me and a link to my book, Stories to Learn Greek, which is perfect for people who have already started their language learning journey. I think that is all for today, and I will see you again with another video.